Okay, this is going to be a weird video because I'm going to actually make a video about something and say things that I never, ever thought I would say. Because oddly enough, this is going to kind of have like two topics in one, because the original intent of this video was to call out all these YouTubers and people who are saying, oh, the comic book industry is dead, the comic book industry is going to die, the comic book industry is over with. And it was to initially establish how stupid and ignorant and full of shit that statement is. So the first half is me basically calling out the bullshit of that statement, and then the second half of this video is me establishing the comic book industry is going to collapse, but it has nothing to do with the SJW. So I want to get the first aspect out of my system. To say that the SJWs are going to cause the collapse of the comic book industry only works if you do not understand or have no knowledge of what the comic book industry has already gone through and how the comic book industry and how comic book fans work. Okay? Because in the mid-50s, you had the Comics Code Authority. The comic book industry had to deal with government-sponsored censorship that would have been an SJW's wet dream. Okay? Yet, despite that, the comic book industry tried its best to still make good comics, and the comic book fan wanted to support the comic book industry, so we wrote it out. Okay? In the late 70s, I believe, in the late 70s, the comic book industry could not get its product to the customer. Okay? Because at the time, the only way that you comic book fan could buy comic books was via the newsstands. But by around the late 70s, I can't remember exactly how it all worked, but it was all about the return policy of the comic newsstands would be able to make better returns, better profit, more money back on returns from magazines than they would from comic books. So they didn't want to waste shelf space on comic books when magazines were more profitable and had a less risk factor in returns. So newsstands weren't displaying comic books, meaning the comic book companies couldn't get their product to the customer. Yet because the comic book industry wanted to fight tooth and nail to survive, and the comic book fan wanted to keep the comic book industry alive, direct distribution happened. Those little racks in those variety stores happened. Comic book shops became a thing, right? There was an aspect between the comic book fan and the comic book industry to want to keep the comic book industry alive. Then it was in the 90s, I think. It was a small little thing, probably not even worth mentioning. What was it again? Oh yeah, the financial collapse of the comic book industry. Okay? The comic book industry survived the collapse of the comic book industry. Okay? So when you tell me that SJWs writing shitty comics with shitty art is going to somehow bring down the comic book industry when the goddamn collapse of the comic book industry couldn't stop the comic book industry, just shows how full of shit and ignorant you are. Okay? And the reason the comic book industry was able to survive the financial collapse of the comic book industry was because the comic book fans, because it was during this time that it was all the extreme comics and the gimmicks and the always restarting at number ones and all the new number ones. That's what caused the financial collapse of the comic book industry. Well, waiting in the wings were all comic book fans going, "Did you get that all out of your system? Are you done? Are you gonna go back to writing good comic books?" And Marvel and DC and all those companies went, "Yeah, we're gonna start writing good comic books again." And the comic book fans went, "Great." And that's why the comic book industry was able to survive all those calamities. They were able to survive the government-sponsored censorship. They were able to survive the inability to get the product to the customer. They were able to survive the financial collapse of the industry because the comic book fan and the comic book industry wanted to keep the industry alive. So with this whole SJW bullshit, yeah, it's been lasting 10 years, but the reason the SJWs don't have a hope in hell is because of collapsing the comic book industry. Is once they're gone, okay, us comic book fans would be in the background going, did you get that out of your system? Are you done? Are you going to go back to writing good comic books? And if Marvel and DC and the rest of the comic book industry had said yes, boom. There's no way the comic book, as long as there are comic book creators willing to make a good comic book, and there are comic book fans willing to buy and read, there's no way the comic book industry will ever die, okay? As long as you have those two factors. That was the original point of this video. Unfortunately for me, I ended up checking and researching and found out that, yeah, there is a chance that not a chance, but there is the inevitable collapse of the comic book industry, okay? But the thing is, it has nothing to do with the SJWs, okay? And I can establish that, okay? You could, like the comic book industry, Marvel, DC, and the rest of the comic book industry could fire and purge every SJW from every position, writer, artist, editor, everything. And the comic book industry is still screwed. Oh, and the whole Marvel is catering to and pandering to SJWs is such bullshit. No, okay? They're not. They didn't hire and are letting the SJWs run rampant because they're catering and pandering to them. It's because the SJWs that invaded the comic book industry were willing to work for such dirt cheap, and the fact that the comic book industry doesn't give a rat's ass whether it creates a good product or not, because since they're being backed by Disney, financially they don't give a rat's ass. They don't have to be successful. The comic book industry, Marvel, doesn't have to be successful in its comic book division. It's backed by Disney, soon to possibly be Apple. So they hired, okay, they let the SJWs, push their agenda because the SJWs go, we'll work for you for dirt cheap wages. And Marvel went, sure, no problem. And the SJW went, we're also going to push our agenda. And Marvel went, who cares? Push whatever agenda you want. As long as you're working for, shit wages, do whatever the hell you want. I'll even, here's another way. Let's say it wasn't the SJWs that invaded the comic book industry, but it was the vegans. The vegan community, for some reason, decided to invade the comic book industry to help push the vegan agenda, ideal, lifestyle, whatever. Okay? Marvel wouldn't have gone, oh yeah, suddenly we want to cater and pander to vegans. It's the vegans would have gone, we'll work for shit wages, but we're gonna push the vegan ideals and agenda and lifestyle. Marvel went, as long as you're working for dirt cheap, push whatever agenda you want. Make whatever comics you want. Marvel Comics doesn't care what the writers and artists are doing. Okay? So I just wanted that established. Okay? Going back to main topic. Again, the comic book industry. Okay. Marvel could shut down the comic, like because of the coronavirus and Diamond distributing ceasing distribution of comic books. Okay, the people at Marvel, if this causes the end of, okay, I'm a little scattered because I got so many points I want to make. Okay, the comic book industry. The way I want to try to describe it is that it's not that the comic book industry is dying. The comic book industry has been on life support for almost a decade. Okay? And all we're waiting for is somebody to just pull the plug and give a mercy killing. Okay? Because if the comic book industry actually dies, it's not because it collapsed and it's dead. It's because somebody gave it a mercy killing. Okay? Like, I was gonna say I am, but I was a Marvel fanboy. Okay? And I am the biggest Silver Surfer zombie fanboy you will ever know. Okay? Because I have every issue that the Silver Surfer is in, whether it's an appearance, cameo, flashback, single panel, I have it. Because luckily the Silver Surfer is not that much popular character, so there's not that many appearances. But it's gone to the point now where even when he's in, like with the Guardians of the Galaxy appearances and the Avengers appearance, and I think it's the new Annihilation, even the stories are so goddamn shit that even I can't read them. I buy them, but I barely even read them because they're not even worth reading. So if Marvel doesn't give a rat's ass enough to care about actually making good comics, then why should I, as a comic book fan, give a rat's ass if they stop making shitty... If it's a choice between shitty stories or shitty comics or no comics, what am I losing? Nothing. Okay? Because it's like the people at Marvel, okay, with Diamond Distributing ceasing operations, the people at Marvel don't care about the comic book industry, okay? Like, the best way I can explain it is, the people at Marvel don't care if Spider-Man stops being a comic book. They don't care if Thor stops being a comic book. They don't care if Doctor Strange stops being a comic book, okay? The only people who care are us comic book fans, and we're dwindling because the problem is there's nothing to wait out anymore, okay? Like, the idea was comic book fans were going to wait until the SJWs left, and it was like, did you get that out of your system? Are you done? You're going to go back to writing good comics? Fine, we'll be there. The problem is the comic book industry is never going to go and say, yes, we're going to go back to writing good comics again. We're going to try to keep our industry afloat and alive and successful. That's not happening anymore. Okay? There's nothing to wait out anymore. There's nothing that the comic book industry is providing to give comic book fans a reason to even come back. Because let's say because Diamond Distributing is ceasing the distribution for a couple of months, that all the SJWs leave, okay? To get other jobs or whatever, okay? Marvel's not going to okay, when I say, I'm basically focusing on Marvel because I'm mostly a Marvel fan. I also mean, you know, with DC and IDW and other comic book companies. But they're not going to suddenly go, oh, we're going to start hiring good writers and have to pay them good wages or hire good art. Like, the days of the comic book superstar artist or superstar writer are gone. Okay? We're never going to get, okay, what's that name? We're never going to get another Jim Lee when he was an artist. Okay? We're never going to get another Todd McFarlane. Okay? That's not going to happen. So there's no incentive for those who are actually interested in writing or are good artists to actually get involved in the comic book industry. Why would they get involved in it when they're going to get paid when they're going to get paid shit wages? So there's no incentive to even have good writers or good artists to even want to enter the comic book industry. Anyway, I'm pretty much ranted out. I just wanted to get that off my chest. The fact that the comic book industry is going to be shut down for a couple of months, if not longer, it's the it's pulling the plug on the comic book industry, because the comic book industry has absolutely no intention to even fight to survive, and there's no motivation for the comic book fan to even want to keep them on life support. So if Marvel and the rest of the comic book industry wants to crash and burn, then you know what? Vios con Dios, my friends, because nobody's gonna the only people who are gonna miss you, the only people who are gonna miss the comic book industry collapsing are the people who make videos talking about the latest comic books or bitching about comic books. Those are the only people. Like, those are the another aspect. There are people talking about how the sales of all these of so many comic books are low. Okay, and it's like, why do they even have 2,000 sales? Who is even buying these comic books? It's those of you on YouTube buying them so that you can talk about them, making videos about them. It's the people making videos complaining about the comic books that are the ones that are buying the comic books in the first place. Nobody else is buying them. Anyway, I'm done. I just had to get that out of my system. I'm out of here. See ya.